Everyone is familiar with the tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream," a line used to market the classic sci-fi horror film Alien. Now this was a movie that tried to combine the horror and sci-fi genres into one experience. It turned out to be a perfectly balanced masterpiece that will always stand the test of time. Then, due to popularity of this franchise over the years, an abundance of video game adaptations came along with some good ones and some we don't speak of. In fact, there hasn't been one based off the original Alien movie for over 30 years, until now. Developed by Creative Assembly, Alien Isolation takes place about 15 years after the events of the first film. Now, when I heard that Creative Assembly was developing this game, I wondered, how the heck would they make a first-person Alien game? I mean, from a developer that is mostly known for making the Total War games, I got a bit worried. Anyway, you play as Ellen Ripley's engineered daughter, Amanda, who we learned from the second Alien film. At the beginning of the game, Amanda finds out from a Samuels that the flight recorder of the Nostromo is being held aboard the Sevastopol station, owned by the Seegson Corporation. Now, that's not Weyland-Yutani, but the team Amanda joins works for them. After a time, you find out that a single xenomorph alien has been on the station, causing massive ship-wide panic, and meanwhile there are rudimentary androids murdering people. In the midst of all that, you hear from a Marshal Waits that Captain Marlowe of the Anestora was responsible for bringing the alien up. Upon speaking to him, Amanda learns that Marlowe's team were the ones who originally discovered the flight recorder near LV-426. During Marlowe's own story, you get to experience firsthand the same scenario the original movie had, of finding a space jockey ship and someone getting face-hugged. It turns out that Marlowe's wife was the one that got impregnated, brought aboard the ship for treatment, and the alien hatched while there. Waits convinces Amanda to help with the entrapment of the creature by luring it to a remote section of the station and sealing it. So there you go about doing that and then trying to get the hell off Sevastopol. I will say that the storyline of Alien Isolation is a weak portion of the game, as it tries to make half-assed reasons for the main events to occur, and it seems a little copied off the films. It's not all bad, seeing as there are a few unexpected turns along the way, but in all honesty, Creative Assembly had a job. They had a job from Sega to make this game, and although the story was not as written as well to my expectations, it was written well enough due to what they had to work with. Unfortunately, that is not the same for the characters and their dialogue. I felt as though the characters lacked development to the point where I didn't even care to hear what they were saying or what they were going to say next. They did their best with the storyline, but the character development could have been slightly more intriguing. Maybe not as well as the movie had done, but somewhat more would have been great. I have heard many complaints about the acting quality of the game too. Say what you will, but I took the acting as being quite realistic, and maybe even a little too much at that. The way I see it, anyone in that situation would be speaking a bit more quietly than in an action film like Aliens. You know, being hunted in the vent by an alien, I think it would be smart to be a little quieter in that life or death scenario. I did think it was alright acting, but if it was deliberate or not, I can't answer that. Even Amanda Ripley didn't seem to represent her mother's strength and steadfast attitude as I wanted. I mean, her emotions and the fear were shown well, but she wasn't written like I know she should have been. She was portrayed decently by the actress, just not written well. To exemplify this, I keep referring to her as Amanda, not Ripley, because I don't feel like she deserves that name and really harnesses the power of her mother that was brought to the original film. Speaking of comparing Alien the film and Alien Isolation, the atmosphere of the game is as impressive, if not more, than the movie presented. One of the first things anyone would notice from the movie would be the eerie, harrowing music that wanted to rival the creepy orchestral moments in 2001: A Space Odyssey. The music for the most part is ripped off from the original Alien score, but the composer of the game leads the music to faster tempos that effectively drive up the intensity from an already desolate scenario. Along with the music, the sound effects also add to the well-presented atmosphere. From creaks to cracks to rustling in the vents, all the sound effects are effectively strung out all throughout the old soon-to-be-commissioned Sevastopol station. Of course, a few noises are nothing without the visuals. You can't have one without the other, and Alien Isolation mixes both together almost masterfully to create a perfectly tense and consistent unsettling atmosphere. The developers use the same conventions as other notable horror games in the past, like Resident Evil and Dead Space, with tight corridors and well-designed lighting to create what it wants to get by so well. It's a horror game. Continuously, the recent conventions like the use of blood and gore to scare that are in games such as Outlast and The Evil Within are just so overdone. Isolation's atmosphere just easily shows that the use of gore to scare is not as effective anymore, and it's just becoming bad taste. Another aspect that helped create such an atmosphere was the game's authenticity to the film. Creative Assembly did an excellent job of creating a new world that is still authentic and also unique to itself. Aside from the space jockey pilot room that isn't really that perfect, every other detail represents the retrofitted technology vibe well. All of it is exemplified with the graphics that are good, but really should be a standard for this generation of games. The effects are great and all, but we know that the impression of any game can be ruined with gameplay bugs and just plain bad choices. Alien Isolation is certainly no exception to this with the lag stutters and animation decisions. At random, indiscernible times, the game would lag up for a length of 5 seconds. Although not a huge problem, it can make one go, alright, yeah, that's a thing that doesn't happen in reality. Along with that, the animations really seem to be lacking too. None of the movements of any of the characters seemed organic or even real. It seemed as though everyone was an android and moved like the working Joes did. There were also some moments where the lip movements during in-game dialogue interactions weren't animated. For the most part, this didn't occur, but when the animations did work, it looked like they were really saying, "Ma'am, ma'am, ma'am." Unfortunately, the animations just reminded me that Creative Assembly has mostly made RTS games in the past, because such games don't rely as much on realistic animations as FPS games severely do. Even through these issues that Alien Isolation suffers from, the atmosphere, with its rehashed but great and true survival horror, lifts it up and keeps moving on strong. Remember when Resident Evil was a true survival horror game? I mean, the fourth game was great, but the next two games turned out to be just action shooter games with no real survival aspect, except to kill hordes of the enemies and relying on huge abundance of health and ammo. Oh yeah, then Dead Space came out, and soon that series took the same turn, with weapon combo system and a loot system to the point of freaking microtransactions. Seriously? Luckily, the recent indie games have finally saved us from this with Slender and Outlast. I remember what I said about Outlast, but here's the thing. That game gives you no way to fight back. The only thing you can do is run and hide. This is some real survival horror for once, and Alien Isolation brings us out again in some intense gameplay. For starters, get a pistol, but it does absolutely nothing to the xenomorph, and very little to the androids. Another weapon that you receive is the iconic flamethrower. Now that doesn't immediately make the game easy, you still need to be swift to the draw, and make sure to keep tabs on ammunition as you quite literally burn through it. The biggest assets to you in Alien Isolation are the scraps found all around the station, and the motion tracker. Since Amanda Ripley is an engineer, she's able to use these found items to craft tools and objects to help escape from many dangerous situations. The crafting system is a great unique feature that doesn't feel overabundant nor too complex. The one great thing about Isolation is that there are no hints on what items work on what. You need to figure that out for yourself. For the motion tracker, it'll keep you alive, but its beeping can attract attention at a close range. Then when something does have your attention, hiding is usually your best bet. It takes almost directly from Outlast, but it is a realistic last resort. It also seems that hiding is a little more fair than you'd expect, too. For example, the alien kid can be just down the hall, clearly seeing you. He can't even tell you're opening a squeaky metal locker and closing it. A bit odd, but, it's still fair. The controls of Alien Isolation, although great enough as it could be designed by a majorly RTS developer, the item selection could have been easier to use, especially when being chased down, but it's alright. Also, I've heard many complaints of the save system, but I find it to be a good challenge to get to each save station. Unfortunately, you can run to one and be right before saving, and still get killed. The same goes for looking for collectibles and scraps in extra rooms that you don't necessarily have to be in. It's up to you whether or not it's worth the risk. Alien Isolation also features something called Survivor Mode. This mode has players go through certain scenarios close to that of the main missions, but gives you certain challenges to complete for placement in leaderboards. It's not much of an addition to the main game, but it's still an interesting way to add a competitive aspect. Alien Isolation overall is a great AAA true survival game, first in a long time, and it may get aggravating at parts, but it made me learn something. Anger is just another form of fear. Bad thing or good thing, Alien Isolation made me learn that. And I know it's strange, but I think getting mad at it's just another effective way to scare you. Just my opinion, but I think we can all agree 100% that this game is wonderfully much better than Colonial Marines. Isolation is quite literally, and pardon the analogy since I've used it before, a love letter to the Alien films and the horror game genre. Through all the faults that it has, Isolation presents an amazingly intense, unsettling feeling throughout without the use of blood and gore, and many jump scares to boot. It also utilizes a refreshing return to the true survival horror with its gameplay. Despite the subpar story, acting, and animations, Isolation just drags you into its world whether you like Alien or think it's too scary. Creative Assembly did the best job they could making a game I am proud to accept into the Alien franchise. It's not a fantastic game, but it is certainly a good one. Alien Isolation earns 4 out of 5 eggs.
Bring back life form. Priority 1. All other priorities rescinded. You can't. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism. Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility. I admire its purity. A survivor. Unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality. Last word. I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.